Okay, so first question. Do you like science fiction?
Oh, a lot. Would you guess it?
Yeah, kind.
Yeah.
I like to know what is your favorite book in history of science fiction, if you have one.
That's a hard one. I would probably say, well, I love the, now I won't remember the name, oh come on, the precursor of the Blade Runner, the original, the Do Android in Dreams of Electric Sheep. It's one of my favorites. Westworld, I adore Westworld. And why I love science fiction even more right now is because of the comics that I read when I was a child. To some portion, they are becoming true right now. So we are extending our technology as far as, obviously we're not creating whatever it was speculated in the books, but at least a portion of it is true, which makes me still dream.
Yeah, that leads me right to the next question. That is, can you say that fiction can become reality and science reality? I mean, how operates the fiction to generate reality?
Well, yes. I think science fiction helps quite a lot because it enables you to foresee the future, to be completely free, and then see what you can actually do in reality about it. So what it does, it's similar to speculative design. It's enable us to foresee the possible negatives and positives impacts of just pursuing a type of, let's say, technology or science in the future. What I do find even more fascinating is, and I think it relates even to design or like speculative design or science fiction, is it is really bound to the era when it was first released. So if for instance you think about it, the science fiction movie from the past, they were always really mechanical because that time that was the mechanical revolution. While if we look at science fiction now, it is all about biotech. So it is still interesting how obsolete they become when a new technology is like put forward.
Totally. Your speculations are designing the future or criticizing the future that you design as a possible future?
The second one. So my provocations are always aimed at not just foreseeing, because I don't think I have the power to foresee what is going to happen in the future, but it essentially showcasing that if we go through a certain path using this type of technology, what might happen, and then it's for the general public to decide if they want this future to happen or not.
Okay. So we talk about the obsolescence of the technologies that we project to the future. Do you think the technology based on silice or the mechanical technology is already obsolete, or could restart a new?
I mean, it's never really obsolete until it goes completely out of our lives, right? We are still using it, but it's not as popular, for instance, as it was. And we can see better ways, better technology to utilize for the same purpose. As I said, like for building androids, it is better to use biotech because it's, if you want to create something more similar to the human, obviously biology is the way to go.
For example, the Internet of Things is like a total subject. Will biotechnologies let obsolete the internet, or will implement the internet to this generation?
I think, as I said, because we are able to translate the genetic code into the binary code, it's probably going to be embedded. What I also foresee now, like I'm talking about foreseeing, is that essentially biotechnology will lead to something that I call it bio-internet, which is essentially the sharing of biological information as freely as we now do it on the internet. And combining those two might be a really powerful mix.
After I will talk you about the science fiction story I'm writing about exactly this thing. But talking about these biological technologies, now we have like the first steps in computation with DNA, or the storage information with the ARN. Is this biology the technology for the future, and who will control this technology that is being made by the DNA of ourselves.
Exactly. I think you actually highlighted a really good point in my work, which is I always try to reassess who should be entitled to set the boundaries of who owns what. And it's quite a complex answer to ask. It's also really depending on within which settings are you asking these questions. So if you, for instance, ask a biotechnologist or a designer or whoever. But I guess it always has its limitation, no matter who owns more of the portion, because if you entitle a person to own their own genetic material, then the research would be some kind of hindered and restricted, because obviously if you don't know how to utilize it, you're missing a chance to create something. And also, as I said, there should also be boundaries taking in place when it comes to the scientists having ownership over this, because scientists a lot of the time doesn't really have these ethical boundaries because it's driven to research. Not to say that they don't have it at all. Obviously there is some type of controlment there, but it has less of them because obviously, yeah, you want to pursue some type of innovation.
Did your research also implies all the research about bioethics and all the discussions about this subject? Or?
Yeah.
I mean, you have like a huge documentation about the state of the mother, actually.
Oh, sorry, of the state of?
You know, like the state of the legal boundaries actual about, or bioethics discussions.
Yes, so there are quite a few missing ones, which is a problem nowadays, and that leaves quite an open, let's say, field for exploitation, although there are some, and obviously I think they're trying to restrict the misusage of it by restricting the storing facilities. So essentially, if you have a registered lab, at least in the UK it is like that, if you have a registered lab, you can store DNA. If you don't, you can't. And that means you can't really access it outside of the lab domain, right?
Do you think that's good or bad thing?
Another tough questions now. I think, well, it restricts the use to just the more of, let's say, university use, which is not always a good case. It's a good case that they have access to it, but maybe more people could have access to it as well. So yeah, it really depends. But as I said, the legal, the limitations are really bound to different countries. So for instance, if you look at a country like Canada, it's more freely, like almost anyone could store genetic information.
I'm sure you know, like these projects, for example, the ones that you send your DNA and they told you if you are Jew or African or which percentage of DNA from every country you have, and you are providing your DNA, you know, like for these companies that in this same moment own it.
Well, I don't know how the contract is because they will probably have to send you a contract. I've never done this. That's why I don't actually know, but what they acquire is data about you. So essentially this is even more personalized data than the one that you send in the internet in terms of where you live. This is what type of diseases you might evolve in the future. To some degree, how you look like, to some degree obviously, and so on. So even more personalized data. Although I also have a problem when it comes to that, and that's probably why I didn't send my sample. If it will be true, I would be probably one of the first ones to send it, because obviously you want to know your ancestry tree. But what that type of technology does is just links your genes to similar genes from people from that type of the world, which doesn't necessarily mean that you derive from them.
Also, there is another project that probably more interesting than the other one, that know which percentage, like it's like make a Facebook test or something like that. But there's another. In Mexico, there's a problem with the people that disappear and never come back, and you don't know. There's a project, I think they base their lab in UK. You can send your genetic information, so in case you disappear, they after can contrast the information they have with the rest they found in other places.
Oh, okay. That's quite an interesting one. I don't know specifically how this works because I don't know which type of genetic information would you have to store and which type is left behind and how can you analyze and see if that's the specific person. Yeah, I'm not quite sure of that. But if it works like that, I think it's a viable application of the technology.
Me neither, but it's good. I think it's a good subject to study because also there's a company that is storing a lot of data. So if you have a huge database about the DNA, human DNA, what you could do with it in the dystopian future and in the utopian if you want to?
Well, I always do this example. Let's say that you go to a doctor, he extracts his genetic information, and then a lot of people said, oh, and then who cares? He has my genetic information. Let's say he sent this to the insurance company, and let's say that this insurance company doesn't want you to insure you for that specific sum because they know that your genes are more prone to produce, I don't know, a specific type of disease or not to produce it. This is just one of the applications, but they can be many, so yeah.
You think something like the social credit that they apply in China could be applied by your DNA by just birth?
Yeah, maybe you will be able to, when you present, I don't know, just speculating here, but like, let's say that you want to get a loan from the bank. Let's say that they want to analyze your DNA in case something would happen, or like insurance and so on. Let's say that in the future everything is dictated by our own genetic information. It is quite a scary future.
Totally. Actually, we are not that far away. All our biometric data is already in our passport, like digital prints, the eyes, the child, like everything.
Exactly, yeah.
So, change the subject totally. You will say that is artificial or natural cloud generate biotechnology with organic material?
Well, that's one of my arguments. We need a completely new word for it because it is becoming such a big practice that deserves its award in its own right, because just like categorizing it as deriving from nature or artificially doing it doesn't cut it, because it's essentially a merge of both. If you think about it, it does include natural occurring materials. It is developed from natural occurring materials, although the procedure to produce it, it's completely man-made.
So we could say that this kind of technology is breaking the frontiers between artificial and natural.
Yeah, it's essentially what I say. We need more language in order to describe what we're experiencing and producing by the means of biotech. We are still quite limited in how to express ourselves about that.
If we speculate more even, do you think that it will be possible to create clothes or different wearables made by human DNA but alive clothes that can fix themselves like we fix ourselves?
Well, I think that's one of the research, that has been going on. I don't know if it's doomed to human material, but it's essentially based on either animal or some type of like factors, because apparently some animal skin do heal even better than the human skin. So if you just take into consideration this type of application can be a really viable inspiration for future products, even if they are not derived from a specific source, but can act as an inspiration.
If it's possible, will my jacket have rights?
That's a good question to ask, yeah, because that's a big, I think, theme currently in the field of biotech, because at what point does a living being have rights, and at which stage do you categorize it as alive as we categorize ourselves as alive? So, yeah.
Sorry, taking questions. So, pure human is based in human DNA, but also we can produce animal skins through biotechnology. Would you think this kind of knowledge about the new materials, how will be generated and shared? I mean, for example, if a new material make of mammoth skin emerge, will be a patent that it owns a brand own the patent and just one brand can use it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that's actually one of the reasons why I developed the passenger pigeon project as well. It's because when you tweak genetic code to a specific degree, you're able to obtain a patent over it. And this poses us in a really scary future when you can own a living being, not necessarily a human, let's say, but like anything alive. And so at what point you restrict this type of thing? Because it's essentially also, if you disable the patent application like that, then you also hinder the scientists to produce this type of things. And it's also like he's married that it is there, so how do you mediate this? And also I think a really good question that derives from it, from the ownership and so on, it's to just think about it. If we can just like revive species, how does our relationship with nature change? Would we just then be more at ease and be like, oh, if we extinct this species, we'll just bring it back to life? Or would we appreciate it more? It's an interesting dynamic.
Wow, you answered one of my questions. It was like if you think it's possible to, take back the biodiversity that we are lost in really fast by this kind of technologies, and if that is good work in the actual environment we have.
Yeah, as I said, the reason why they're developing the passenger pigeon is because it was really important for the Northern American forest line, and their biodiversity had dropped quite a bit, and they found out that it is actually due to the fact that the passenger pigeon is missing, and that's why they're trying to bring it back. Although, as I said before, we need to realize that this passenger pigeon, as I said, will be a fake copy of the passenger pigeon, because obviously if you bring an entire bird back to life, well, he doesn't have a proper foster parents for once, he doesn't have his own environment for the second, and thirdly, how are we really sure that that is actually the real passenger pigeon?
So could be even more interesting or more dangerous to create new species that make the functions that we think the nature needs?
Well, we are to some degree already creating new species, because we are merging together different species anyways. So just introducing, I don't know, a fungus to another area, it's introducing it to another area, that means that it bounds with that type of environment and it produces a whole new different species. So we have been doing that for decades, like for not even decades, for the beginning of time. The thing is just like now we can really operate it within the laboratory sector, and that's why it's probably so scared to think about this.
Far from the science fiction, back to the reality, actually most of these things are happening already, but not with animals, but with plants. What's your opinion about transgenics?
Crosses between plants? Well, it's an open thing. As I said, we have been doing this from the beginning of time, so I don't think we're doing anything different from there on. If we can benefit from crossing two plants together, well, why not? I see the human body as let's say, a merge together of different cells, not even as an entire organism, and we have been bounding together with other organisms all the time, so yeah.
But, for example, now a lot of plants are illegal because there are patents that use it, and so you cannot plant this plant at your home or in your field because it's forbidden. If new species animals or human DNA is just patented, will be living beings forbidden?
Yeah, that's an interesting question to pose. Actually, I think also some type of animals are already forbidden if in places you can't really take them. But yeah, let's take it to the more dystopian way. What if these become humans? It's really like a scary alternative that we think about. So how do we prevent this thing from happening? Room for another critical speculative project.
Also, probably, no, certainly, your Pure Human project is the more famous project, the one you have made. But I'm more interested in I Am Identity Database. I was just reading your webpage about the project. I think I didn't really get it totally. I mean, where is the boundary between the speculation and the real science in this project? And if you can just talk about a bit about the project and explain.
Yeah,
really
so
cool.
essentially, well, it was quite a fast project. It was to introduce the topic of labelness for a conference, and essentially it speculates on the fact that the human shouldn't be restricted to nationalities, skin color, and so on. Things, not skin color, but everything else is already listed in our passport. But then if you completely remove the passport, how do you regulate and kind of like prohibit bad things to happen? So essentially, what if we would bound everything to our DNA, which means what if you would store any type of crime, any type of information to our DNA, and that will enable us to form, as you said, together, merge together data, like digital data and biodata, and enable us to kind of like assess a human based on the conglomerate of both of those two data.
It's quite impressive, like this project. Okay, I think more or less I end my list of questions. Yes, a stupid one. Is Jurassic Park closer to be real?
So it's amazing how many people, first thing that they ask me when I talk about the phylogenetic atelier project is like, what about dinosaurs? I know, I would love to see like I am a huge fan, specifically let's be here really precise. Jurassic Park 1 was the best one.
Of course.
And I would be probably the first person running to the park, don't care if they eat me alive. The only problem is that the DNA is too damaged. And even though the DNA, as it promoted, survives for thousands and thousands of years, it is still too damaged in order for us to completely regenerate a new species. The second part is, even if you would achieve to do so, who will give birth to a dinosaur? It needs to be a species that is quite similar, and the most similar ancestor that the dinosaur currently have is a chicken, which poses quite a bit of problem.
Mini dinosaurs? Tiny ones? Oh, that would be weird.
I will just say giant chickens or something.
I just will be happy if we take back the dodos from the extinction.
Yeah. If you would to ask me though, which animal would I bring back? I think, because I have a lot of problems when it comes to just those, let's say, poster childs like the mammoth and so on, because we don't have an environment to bring back the mammoth, so I think it's unfair to bring it back. But what I think would be fair is a species that it's now categorized as extinct, but it's not extinct. It still has two living specimens, which is the white rhino. So essentially, because there are both females and are not able to reproduce, the species is doomed to extinction. So if you would to de-extinct a male rhino that will have a natural environment in which he can like grow up or normal rhinos, he will have foster parents that are appropriate for him. I think that will be actually a viable preservation technique for the extinction.
Yeah, it would be really cool. What's the question or the requirement that someone ask you, the weirdest one in your career or as an artist?
Oh, there have been a few. I think, well, I can't say that they ask weird questions because I propose weird questions and I propose weird topics, so we are kind of like on the same level. But there have been a lot of people interested in the technology for commercial use, which I think it's quite a stretch, like to just look at it. But obviously you can't really, well, you can't like really judge them for that, because it depends obviously on the application that they were thinking in mind. But yeah, I don't, to highlight a specific one, I don't know. I got called, well, not a question, but I got called a creepy evil genius that works in a basement, so yeah.
We were talking lately before the interview about the Angelina Jolie request.
It was a Beyonce one.
A Beyonce.
Yeah, to create Beyonce jacket. Or even there is a lot of requirements, which it's interesting to think about it. A lot of like people that would actually love for their loved ones who passed away to revive them through products. And I think this is a whole new notion that we're just tapping into in the future, because as we're changing our relationship with objects, with physical objects, I think that goes under the same domain.
At the ritual level, the cannibalism exists, and some cultures that eat the enemy to get the strength, or some relative to get some part with them. Do you think it could be a weird project to make some eatable stuff with the human DNA?
Well, just to respond, well, I didn't know their actions, what they were thinking, but it also has a really pretty romantic side to it, if you think about it, how, like, in the past, like, prostitutes chop off their hair and give it to the loved ones because they know they're gonna die from syphilis, so they can have it for ages and so on. It depends on how you look at it. Well, it comes to, we were just having a really interesting debate about cannibalism and so on. So where does this leave us when we can create, let's say, Beyonce steak, and you can have it without the current ethical implications, so without harming her or anything, like, let's say she signs a consent. Like, how does your mentality change when it comes to it? It's also an interesting talk that I had with the lady from the Vegan Society, when there is one of the categorization what a material it's categorized as vegan, is the fact that well, you are harming animals and they cannot give you their consent, so they cannot consent for you to eat them or use their leather, skin or whatever. Well, if we're talking about human leather then, and a human can give you your consent, then does it, at least to that kind of restriction, makes it vegan? So, yeah, interesting new questions.
So this is all for my part. Thank you for pushing the boundaries with this speculative design.
Oh, thank you for the inspiring debate.
And if someone have any other question, because the imagination have open up, that's the moment also for the public.
I think they're scared of us.
They are still here, so not that scared.
Bueno, yo vi hace poco un documental que se llama The Next Black, que seguramente lo conoces. Y ahí había una diseñadora que hacía como biotextiles a partir como de hongos y como cosas que crecían y las generaba en un textil, y eso lo hacía una prenda. Bueno, mi pregunta sería, ¿tú qué tan viable ves esto como a corto plazo, o si realmente todavía estamos muy lejos de generar ropa que podamos casi como que crece de los árboles o algo así? O sea, no de esa manera obviamente, pero como de un biotextil, o sea, que no tenga que ser sintético ni nada, que sea totalmente biodegradable y que sea como, que esté en armonía con el planeta y que no contamine y todo eso.
I think you would have to translate for me.
Oh. Okay. She asked about the project. An artist is working with biomaterials, but like a fungus or vegetal, and how do you think if it's possible or not in a short period of time to use these biomaterials, like they're not synthetics into the
Well, we are probably, I think we are already using some of them. I think, I don't know if they're used in the clothing industry, but they're for sure using in building industry. So for instance, for isolation and stuff like that, they're using bioengineering materials. And yes, I can foresee a future when we are using that, although I have a problem when they're categorizing not as textile, which is a fair way to categorize them, but when like their mushroom or pineapple is categorized as leather. You know, those new types of leather that they emerge, like you can have pineapple, mushrooms, and so on. The problem I have with this, it's well, if the process, how you obtain it, and the material itself is completely different, then why are we still calling it leather? It has a fair amount of characteristic on its own, and it's a viable textile, but it's a bit like calling cotton leather. So why are we categorizing it in the same department? I don't know if this answers your question.
I have another question. Can you remind me exactly what you were talking about when you were talking about some problems with genes and other species? Or wait, I think I can say this. So in the labs we work in Texas, we work with citrus and other plants of importance, and we do genetic transformations. Mm-hmm. And one of them that's very important, the lab I was working in, Dr. Murkov, they used a protein peptide from a study that was, I think it was in 1999, from a university in Spain, in Murcia. Mm-hmm. And what we did was we got the peptide from spinach, which is a different organism than citrus, and we were able to isolate that peptide, introduce it with the vector, agrobacterium, into the citrus. And that has been working out very well as far as having resistance to certain viruses. Mm-hmm. with plants. But I wanted to bring this up because the other alternative was to use proteins, defensin peptides from pigs. And so being able to isolate, genetic material that way, introduce it into something that we eat very often, that would very much stir a debate, kind of like how Tina stirred a debate with her skin and skin leather, right? But this is more on a level where it has immediate importance. So the decision was made to take the genes from the spinach instead of the pig to kind of avoid that debate. Mm-hmm. and avoid all the red tape that we're still fighting with the spinach. Imagine if we had chosen the pig, mm-hmm. it would be a much longer road to recovery, because a lot of these transformed plants are showing resistance, but they're not available for commercial growers now. So it takes a long time, like the patent process we talked about. It's even longer with transformations. You get them going in the lab. Mm-hmm. They glow under certain spectrums to show the gene of interest has been introduced into the plant. Mm-hmm. And to get into the commercial realization, it takes much, much longer. So it's a very long path, but I agree with you. I approve all these things we can do to genetically transform species, because horizontal gene transfer has been going on since as long as we know it. Wolbachia, all kinds of vectors introduce foreign genes to help with defense properties in other organisms. But that's all I wanted to say. It's many things we can talk about, but that's just one of the few things that I wanted to bring up. Yeah,
I think it's actually a really viable debate for two things, which I can see. The first one is, as you mentioned, the time frame when it comes to implement it into the industry. A lot of people don't realize that when a cool project on a small scale is put up, then why don't they just embrace it on a larger scale? Well, to translate it on a larger scale, there is so many problems, one in them being the results on a smaller scale, usually when it comes to biotech, don't mimic a result on a larger scale as well. The second one that you have really nicely introduced is also the fear of people when we talk about GMO, the GMO of plants and so on. So essentially people are still quite afraid of these terms, but I think we just need to kind of enable people to get to the real information when it's, would you rather have a cross plant, like a plant that is crossed between two plants, or would you rather use a ton of pesticide on this plant? So does GMO still sound so horrible right now?
I agree. It's just common sense isn't very common. We just have to open the dialogue and be able to communicate, because people think scientists just inject needles into things and that's how it works. It's much more complicated than that.
True.
It takes a lot of expertise, and there's a lot of technical error, of course. We make mistakes all the time. But we have to let people know we make mistakes and we improve upon those mistakes. So, thank you.
Thank you.